Hello everyone, welcome to another video tutorial on the Code Angle YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we're going to be creating an avatar upload application by making use of the main stack. The main stack is a combination of four different technologies, which are MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node.js. So we're going to combine these four technologies to create this avatar uploads application. So the process for this tutorial is going to be divided into three parts. The first part is going to be from the front end. So we start up on the front end by making use of Angular to design the user interface. So once we are done with the designing of the user interface, then we move straight to the back end. That is, we'll make use of Express and Node to create the RESTful APIs. Then once we are done with that, we set up MongoDB Atlas as well and connect it to the backend. So once we connect the database and the REST APIs together, then we can now move straight to the front end and then try to consume the REST API by making use of Angular, which allows us to have a CRUD application. That is, we'll be able to create, read, edit, and delete data. With that, I will now show you the demo of what this application does. So as you can see on the top right section of this application, we have a button that says add avatar. If I click on this button, I get routed to a page where we can add a new avatar. So to add an avatar, we need to have an avatar name. As you can see, this submit button is disabled. The only time it gets enabled is when we enter our avatar name as well as the file, that is the avatar file we choose to upload. So I'm gonna give this avatar name probably a random name that says testing one. So I'm going to click on choose file and the file explorer is going to get opened, and inside of the file explorer I can select an avatar. Probably I can just go with this particular avatar right here, and then once I click on open, then the button gets enabled. So once I click on the enabled submit buttons, it queries the endpoints. We get navigated back to the dashboard, and then the newly uploaded avatar gets displayed on the page, as you can see right here. Another thing we need to do is to test out the edit and the delete avatar functionalities. So what I can do is to click on the newly uploaded avatar, and I can see a modal gets popped up, and on this modal I have two buttons, the edit button as well as delete button. So we can first test out the delete button by clicking on delete, and then this avatar would get deleted from the UI. As you can see, this avatar no longer displayed on the page. So another thing I can test out is the edit button. So probably I can just select this first image you have right here, and then I can click on edit, and then we get navigated to the edit page, and the name gets preloaded on the form. So I can just probably edit the name right there and say probably testing new 2, and then choose a file we want to upload. Probably I select this particular image you have right here and then click on open, and as you can see, it has been chosen, and then this submit button gets enabled. So once I click on the submit button, if the request is successful, we get navigated to the dashboard, and then the newly updated avatar gets displayed on the page. So that's what this application does. And as you can see, when we go to the MongoDB Atlas, every entry we have gets saved in the Mongo Atlas database, as you can see right here. And also Cloudinary also helps us to save each of the image as they appear on the dashboard. Anytime we delete any image right here and we head to the Cloudinary dashboard and we refresh, the image would have already been deleted. Also, when we perform updates, is also going to get updated on the Cloudinary dashboard, and probably we should test that out as well. Probably I can just I can delete this image you have right here, and then also delete this image again, so we no longer have this image on the dashboard. And if I refresh the avatar dashboard, I believe that image will no longer show. As you can see, that image no longer shows on the dashboard. We just have only the image on our Angular application showing on the Cloudinary dashboard. Now, another thing we're going to do is we're going to test our API by making use of a tool called Talent API Tester. We could have made use of Postman for this, but I consider Postman a heavy desktop application. But this is just a Chrome plugin that I believe is quite simple and straightforward. So later on in the tutorial, I'm going to show us how we are going to document our API. As you can see on the left sidebar here, we have the add upload REST API as well as the delete upload, the get upload by ID REST API as well as the update upload REST API. So we're going to make use of this tool to test out our REST APIs. And before we get started with this project, I just want to explain what the main stack means. The main stack is one of the most popular web technologies we have out there. It's a combination of four different technologies, as I said earlier, which are MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node.js. It is used to develop full stack web applications. And although it has different technologies, all these technologies are JavaScript based languages. So quickly, let's take a look at each of these technologies independently. So I'm going to start with MongoDB. So as you can see, MongoDB is a cross-platform document-oriented database program. Classified as a NoSQL database program, MongoDB uses JSON-like documents with optimal schemas. MongoDB is developed by MongoDB Incorporation. MongoDB comes with features such as load balancing, real-time analytics, document-oriented, and as well as data sharding and the likes. MongoDB was initially released in February 11, 2009. So quickly, let's move on to Express. Express.js is a backend web application framework for building RESTful APIs with Node.js. It was created as free and open source software under the MIT license. It has important features such as setting up middlewares, routing support, rendering of HTML through template engines, and the likes. And we're going to look at some of these later on in the tutorials, that is creation of middlewares as well as routing. Also, Express was initially released on the 16th of November 2010. So the next technology is Angular. Angular is a TypeScript based free and open source web application framework led by Angular team at Google and by a community of individuals and corporations. Angular is a completely different technology from AngularJS, which no longer gets supported by Google. Angular comes with so many default features such as data binding, dependency injection, a powerful command line interface, also known as the CLI, as well as forms and routing support. Angular was initially released on 14th of September 2016. And finally, the last technology we're going to look at is Node.js. Node.js is a cross-platform open source server environment that runs on Windows, Linux, Unix, macOS, and many more. Node.js is a backend JavaScript runtime environment, and it runs on the V8 JavaScript engine. It executes JavaScript code outside of a web browser. So the important thing to take note of here is Node.js is not a programming language, rather it's a backend JavaScript runtime environment. So Node.js comes with features such as high scalability, node package manager support, advantage of caching, memory efficiency, and the likes. Node.js was initially released on May 27th, 2009. So that's a summary of all the four technologies we are going to be using today: MongoDB, Express, Angular, and Node. So before we also start, I want us to know that the prerequisite for this tutorial is for us to have a good knowledge of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Once you have a good knowledge of these technologies, I believe you'll be able to follow through from the beginning to the end of this tutorial. So one thing to also take note of is in this tutorial, the source code will be made available. As you can see on the page, the front end code is going to be on GitHub as well as the backend code. I separated each of these repositories, and later on, probably in my next tutorial, I'm going to show us how we can host each of these applications by making use of Netlify and render and make it live on the browser. So that's all for the introductory parts of this tutorial. We can now get started with this project. To start off with this project, the first thing we need to do is to create a new Angular project, and you can do that by typing the command ng new and then the name of the project, which we're going to call ng-avatar. Then with this, you can press enter. You get asked a couple of prompts. The first one is about if you want routing. Yes, we want routing for this project, and then this type of styling you want. I'm gonna go with the traditional CSS, and then a new project will get generated for us. If you're new to Angular, you can head over to angular.io, and when you get on this page, you can click on docs, and then you can now click on setup. So you'll be presented with some instructions on how to install Angular. You can go ahead and follow this instruction and then create a new project in the process. Now that our project has been generated by the Angular command line interface, we can now cd into that project, which is called ng-avatar. So what I can do is do cd and then ng avatar, and then we're in the Angular project. So the next thing to do is to open up the project in Visual Studio Code, and we can do that by the command code dot. So it opens the project in Visual Studio Code, and then we can now see the project structure of Angular. As you can see, we have lots of files on the Visual Studio Code. Among them is the src directory, which is where we'll do most of the work. So I'm going to open the src directory and then open up the app directory as well. As you can see, we have the app routing file, which controls the routing of the application, and then we have the app module file as well, which takes in all the necessary modules we will need in this Angular project. So next thing I want to do is to integrate Bootstrap 5 into this project. I can do that by making use of the Bootstrap 5 CDN. I've done that so many times on this YouTube channel. So I'm just going to head to the Bootstrap 5 documentation or website, as we may call it as well. So inside of the website, which is called getbootstrap.com, we can see on the landing page, you have the CSS CDN link as well as the JS CDN link. I'm going to copy both links and then head straight to our Angular project, and then in the index.html file within the head section, I'm going to paste the CSS link right there, and then on the body, and then inside of the body, I'm going to paste the JavaScript CDN link. And all I need to do is to save, and that's all we need to do in this particular file. So I'm going to close it up. So the next step I'm going to do is to generate the components we'll need for this project. And we're going to need about 4 components. We're going to need the components to add the avatar, to edit the avatar, to list the avatar. And I think we also need the navbar component. So let me quickly do that using the command line interface of Angular. So I can just do ng generate components, and then probably we want this to be inside of a components folder. So I'm going to say component / add avatar, and then we can make use of the and command and then run the rest of the commands. So just after the and command, I can just do list avatar, and then another command is the components to edit the avatar, and then we also need to create a navbar like I said previously. So this is gonna be components / navbar. I think for now that's all the components we'll need. So later on, if we need any extra components, I'm gonna generate it using the Angular CLI. So I can press enter, and then all this is going to be generated inside of our Angular project. As you can see, all the projects has now been generated, and we can check it out in our Visual Studio Code. And within the project directory, we can see we have all the components: the add avatar, the edit avatar, the list avatar, as well as the navbar component. I think the first thing we should start with is the navbar. So we need to create a navbar. But first, you might want to know how the page looks currently. So I can just start the command for Angular by running ng-serve. This is gonna compile the entire Angular project, and then we're going to see how it looks like on the browser. Now that our project has compiled successfully, I'm going to go to the default port of Angular, which is localhost port 4200. And as you can see on the browser, we have this default page that loads on the browser. This was generated when we created a new Angular project. And if we head straight to Visual Studio Code, the code for that page is in the app.component.html file. So we need to get rid of everything in there, as we don't need to have that on the page. So to create a navbar, what we need to do is to head straight to Bootstrap 5. But before I do that, let me clear the boilerplate. But one thing we need on this app.components.html file is the router-outlet. This is what makes our routing tick. So we need to leave it here, because if we remove it, we're gonna have issues with our routing. So I'm gonna save, and then let's see how the page looks. As you can see, it's just blank. So what I can do next is just to import the selector for the navbar component, which is app-navbar. So I'm going to paste it right above the router outlet, so our navbar gets displayed on the page. So I'm going to close this, And then when I save, you see the navbar component now shows on the page. As you can see, we have navbar works showing here. So when I complete the navbar, it's going to be showing at the top of this page. So we can do that in Bootstrap 5 by searching for navbar. So I click on navbar, and then we'll see different types of navbars which are available in Bootstrap 5. So I'm gonna go for something very simple. Let me scroll down. So we're gonna go for something like this. And so I'm gonna grab this entire code by clicking on this copy button and then head straight to the navbar component, the HTML file in fact. So I'm going to clear this navbar works and then paste in this particular code, and we can edit it. So instead of navbar, we can just have ng avatar, since it's an avatar project. And then instead of search, we can just have add avatar. So the add avatar button is going to be right there, and we can just remove the input type of submit. We don't need to submit anything. What we need in that page is the routing to work. That is, anytime we click on the add avatar, it navigates us to the page where we need to add an avatar. And I think that's all we need to do here. I don't think, okay, we don't need the input field, so I'm going to clear the input tag. So let me save and see how the page looks on the browser. Okay, I think it looks good enough, but probably the add avatar button is kind of close to the edge of the page. Maybe I can just add mx-4 for some margin. I think, yeah, I think that's much better. I think I should also add it to an a tag which contains the ng avatar text. So I'm going to say mx-4 and then save as well. And I believe the text should move. There should be a bit of margin on the text now, as well as this button. So now that we've integrated Bootstrap 5 and then we've created the necessary components, we've also created our navbar. The next thing we need to do is to design the page. The first component we're going to design is the components to list the available avatars. So to do that, I'm going to click on the notepad we have right here and grab the CSS for that. So I'm going to copy this and then paste it in the style.css file as we have right here, and then I'm going to save. These styles we have right here are pretty much easy, and you can go through it. Very simple and straightforward. And the component we want to design is called the list avatar component. So I'm going to expand that, and then inside the list avatar component, I'm going to clear the default text we have there. I'm also going to close the CSS styles and other files we have open. So here we're going to make use of Bootstrap classes to display the avatars. So the first thing we want to do is to have a div with a container. So I'm just going to say dot container, and then within this div we also have a class called avatar. So I'm going to say dot avatar and then press enter as well. And then we also have a div with the class name of avatar dash list. So I'm going to have avatar dash list and then press enter as well. Then within this avatar dash list, this is where we now have our images. So what I'm going to do is, because we have no images in the database for now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the HTML tags that have images that are already hosted online. So I'm going to open my notepad once again. So I'm going to grab this piece of code we have right here, and then I'm going to copy it and then head straight to our Visual Studio Code and then paste in the HTML for that. As you can see, the img tag has src links to certain images that seems to be hosted on the Cloudinary service. So I'm gonna save, and then let's see how the page looks this time around. So we can't see anything because we haven't configured the routing for this project. So due to this, the next thing we need to do in this project is to create our routing. So to create the routing, so I need to head straight to the app-routing.module.cs file. So we can scroll down and see this file, which is right here. The list component is going to be our base component anytime someone comes to the application, because that's the component that shows all the list of avatars. So as you can see in Angular, the route is contained in an array. So what we can do is we need to create objects to contain each of our routes. So the first route is going to have a path, and then the path is going to be called add dash avatar. Another item within the object is going to be called the component. So I'm going to say component, and then the name of the component, which is going to be add avatar. So we need to import these components to avoid any form of error. So as you can see above right here, the components gets imported. So we're going to do that for the next two components, which is the edit component and the list avatar component. So I'm going to add a comma right here, and probably I'm going to duplicate this particular object 3 times. So the next route we have to configure is the edit avatar. So I'm going to say, instead of add avatar, I'll have edit avatar right here, and this is going to have a /: id, because it's in the edit avatar component. We're going to integrate what we called activated route parameters, because we need to edit individual or single avatars. So to identify a single avatar, we need to make use of route parameters to help us to do that. So I can import the edit avatar component by typing in edit avatar and then enter. As you can see, that's also imported above right here. And then the last component we need to import is the list avatar component, and the path is going to be empty by default because that's the base of our application. So in the component part, I need to import it. So I'm going to say list avatar components, and then we need to import it as well. I think it has been also imported for us already. And finally, in this last part, we need to auto redirect anytime we get to the landing page of the application. So what do I mean by this? The path is going to be empty, and then here we don't need the component key. The next thing we need to do is to redirect. So I'm going to make use of the redirect key, and then that's going to be empty as well, like it has an empty string. And finally, we're going to set the path match to full, so we can now go ahead to save. So the redirect is supposed to be redirect to, in fact, not just redirect. Yes, that was why the application was freaking out. So that means our list avatar component is the component which is going to be the landing page of our application. So let's see how the page looks like. As you can see, we now have all the avatars showing because the landing page is the list avatar component. So our routing has now been configured. So, and with that, we are done with the UI. We can now start creating the backend of the application. As I said in the beginning, the project is divided into 3 steps. The first step is the designing of the components, which we just did. The second step is now going to be about creating the backend, and then finally we now come back to the front end to integrate the REST APIs we created in the backend. So now we can begin the creation of the backend of our project. So as you can see, before we begin the backend, I already have my project opened in the right directory, which you should do as well. And also for the backend, we're making use of Node.js and Express. I think I've mentioned that. So now within this directory, I need to run a specific command which is called npm init. Npm init is going to ask you some prompts, so I don't want to answer those prompts. I can escape that by making use of the -y flag, and then if I press enter, so the package.json file gets generated. With this, we can now start configuring our backend. But first, I want to open this in the Visual Studio Code, so I'm going to type in code dot, just like I did with the Angular project. So as you can see, we have the package.json file right here, and this is where all the dependencies, anything we install, this is where it's gonna get saved. That is in the dependencies array, but it's not showing because we've not started injecting any packages, which we are going to do through npm, also known as node package manager. So I'm going to open the terminal one more time, and then we can start installing every package we need. So the first package we need to install is Cloudinary. So I'm going to do npm install Cloudinary. With this, we'll be able to connect with the Cloudinary service in our backend. Another package we need to install is Course. This npm package will allow us to access our backend from the front end. That is going to prevent any form of course error that might occur during the consumption of the REST API. The next package is called .env. .env allows us to prevent sensitive data from being pushed to version control, so it's a very important npm package. Then we have Express, which is a Node.js framework, very important, helps our implementation to be easier. Then another package is the Express as a sync handler. So I'm gonna say type in Express async handler right here, And the Express async handler helps us to configure our code in an asynchronous manner. So it helps our request to get handled properly in terms of error handling and the likes. So the next package is Mongoose. So I'm going to type in Mongoose. Mongoose allows us to connect to the MongoDB Atlas. So it's also a very important npm package. Then we have Morgan as well. Morgan helps us to log every request we make in the terminal. It helps with debugging and the likes. So finally, the last npm package we need to install is called Multer. Multer is a middleware used for handling multi-part form data. That is, anytime we want to upload files, Multer is the package we can use. There are other packages out there also, but for this tutorial I've decided to go with Multer. So with that, we can now press enter and watch as how this packages gets installed. Now, as you can see, all our npm packages has been installed, so I can just head straight to the package.json file. As you can see, you can notice the changes. We now have a dependencies object that contains all the list of the npm packages we install. So now we can get started with the project structure. So the first thing we need to create is probably the entry point of our application, which is going to be called server.js. So this is like the entry point of our application. So the next file we need to create is the .env file, which helps us to save sensitive data. We also have the gitignore file, prevents us from pushing certain heavy documents like the node modules into the version control. So I'm just going to say gitignore and then press enter. So next up, we need to create some folders. The first folder we're going to create is going to be the config folder. We're going to need the middleware folder, so I'm going to create that as well. Oh, no, that shouldn't be inside the config folder, so I'm going to delete it. Every folder is independent of the other. So another folder we need to create is called the middleware, just like we tried to do a moment ago. Then we have the model folder. This folder is going to contain our schemas, and then we also have the routes folder, which is the last folder we are going to create. It's going to contain the setup for the route of our RESTful API. So before we proceed with the development of this backend application that is creating of our REST APIs, what I'm going to do is to head straight to the browser and then set up the MongoDB Atlas database. So I think that's important before we proceed. So you can just go on Google and search for MongoDB, and then you can click on log into your accounts as one of the results that is showing, and then you get navigated to a page where you can log in either by email or by your Gmail account. For me, I have an account already, but I want this process to be from scratch, so I'm going to try to use a new account and start the entire process from the beginning. So what I can do here is just to click on the Google button and then select an account I haven't used before. Now we get navigated to a page where we need to accept the privacy policy and the terms of service. You can click on submit if you agree, and if you don't, I guess that ends the creation of this application, because you need to cancel the sign up. Probably you might use another database like Postgres or something else. But for the rest of us that accepted the privacy terms and conditions, so we can see we now get navigated to a welcome page, and the entire thing I believe is still configuring, and we get navigated to another page as well. For this project, we'll be making use of the free tier, because what we are trying to build is just a basic level application. We don't expect to have thousands of users. We get navigated to the welcome page, as you can see right here, and then we get asked a question: what's our goal for today? I can just click on learn MongoDB. What type of application are you building? We're trying to build a single page application, so I'll select single view, and what preferred language, I would select JavaScript, and I click on finish. So once that is submitted, we get navigated to a page where we need to select our plan. We have the serverless plan, we have the dedicated plan, and then we have the shared plan, which is free. So because what we are trying to create, like I said earlier, is not something with a lot of users, it is more of an educational tutorial, so I'm just going to use the free service and then click on create. We get navigated to a page where kind of selects some options, and the first one is the cloud provider and region. We can either go with AWS, Google Cloud, or Azure. I think I'll stay with AWS. And for latency, you can select a location closer to your area. So I'm gonna stay with Paris. I think the time zone is closer to my region, or my country rather. And then once that is done, I can scroll down again and probably select a cluster tier. We have the free forever tier and one that has $9 a month and then $26 a month. I think we stay with the free tier. And then additional settings, we have if you want backup, you can select that, but we don't need backup. And then the cluster name, I think I'm gonna give the cluster name the main stack, since we are creating a main stack project. It says cluster name can only be XSHI letters, XC letters, numbers, and hyphens. Okay, so I guess they have to be together. So the main stack, yeah, there you go. So I think with that we are good to go, and I can click on create cluster, and I guess a new cluster gets created for us. And as you can see on this page, it asks for our username and our password, while at the same time the cluster gets is getting provisioned. So the username for this project, I'm gonna call the code angle. You can call it whatever you want. And then for the password, of course, my password is going to be personal to me. And then I'm going to click on create user. Before you click on create user, I want you to know that this password is going to be important later, so it's very vital you do not input a password you are going to forget. So because when we try to integrate or connect to the MongoDB Atlas in our Express in our Node.js application, the password will later come in play. So make sure you take note of the password you enter. And then I'm gonna click on create user. So a new user has been created for us. As you can see, the username is the code angle. Next thing we need to do is to configure the IP address. Now the IP address is also an important factor. You can probably whitelist your IP address, which allows you to connect to the MongoDB Atlas from anywhere you are, or you can add your current IP address. So for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to whitelist the IP address so I do not run into any form of issue. So for me, I'm going to make sure the IP address is whitelisted. So to do that, I'm just going to type in 0.0.0.0 then /0, and then you can add a description. I can just say whitelist, and then I can add this particular entry. Okay, I think there's an error somewhere. There's not supposed to be there shouldn't be a dot after the final 0 before the /. So I'm going to add that entry. So with that, I can just click on finish and close. Then we get a modal that says congratulations on setting up access rules. So I'm going to click on go to database, and then we get navigated to our database. So now that our database has been configured, we can now head back to our Node.js application and then try to serve the application. So to do that, I'm going to head straight to Visual Studio Code, and then in the server.js file, which is the entry point of our application. So to get started with this, I'm going to require every npm package we created, and once I do that, I'm also going to try to start the Express server, which is very important. So to do that, I'm going to start with Express first. So I'm going to say const express is equals to require express. Then the next package we need to bring in is called course. So I'm going to say const course is equals to require course. And then we need to bring in Morgan as well. So I'm going to say const Morgan is equals to require Morgan. We need to require Mongoose as well. So I'm going to say const Mongoose is equals to require Mongoose. And then .env is also a monk. So const.env is equals to require .env, and then we now need to configure the port of our application. So to configure the port, I'm going to say const uppercase port is equals to process dot env dot port, or the number of our ports, which we're going to set as port 5000. So in our .env file, what we can do here is we can just say port is equals to 5000, and then I'm going to save. So what this means is, while trying to serve the port, if the process.env.port doesn't get accessed, then it can make use of this 5000 ports directly. Like it's just like providing an extra option. That's why we are making use of the or operator. So now that we've imported the necessary npm packages, so like I said, we need to start the Express server. But before I proceed with that, I need to also allow .env file to be accessible in this project. And to do that, I'm gonna first type this comment that says allow access to .env file. To do that, we're gonna do something. We're gonna call the .env variable we created above by saying .env.config, which is like calling the config object. With this, we're able to make use of the process.env.port. That is, anything we try to import from the .env file is going to be made possible in our entry, in this particular entry file, which is the server.js. So for the Express server, we can also say const app is equals to Express. We're also calling the Express function we create above. So with that, we can also proceed to configure the middleware as well. I can just say middleware. I think we need about 3 middlewares here. I think all variable for that has been created above. So I can just say middleware. And for the middleware, we need to make use of the course. So I'm going to say app.use and then course with an S. And then we also make use of the express.json. So I can just say app.use and then express.json. I think this helps us to return a JSON response. And then finally, we have Morgan, which helps us to log every time we query the endpoints or the REST APIs. So I can just say Morgan, and then it's kind of has an argument called common. So I think you can check out the Morgan documentation. It has other capabilities as well, but for this project, we just want to log the REST APIs anytime we call it in the terminal. So now that our middleware has been configured, we need to now listen to the ports. So to do that, I'm just gonna say I'll make a comment called ports, and then I'm gonna say app.listen. This allows us to listen to the ports, and then I'm going to say ports, which is a variable we created above, and then we have an arrow function. Oh my bad, an arrow function. And within this arrow function, I'm going to console log, which allows us to know if our port is running. So I'm going to say console.log, and then I make use of backticks server running on ports, and then I make use of the $sign and then ports, that is the number of the ports that the server is currently running on, and then we're gonna save. So to make our job easier, we need to check the package.json as well, and once more, and inside the package.json, we need to enable the start script. So I'm gonna clear this text right here, or test rather, and then I'm gonna say start, because this is where the start script to start the server is going to be configured. I'm just going to say nodemon server.js. So this is the command to start up the application. To start the server, I can just say nodemon server.js. And if you are not aware, I already have nodemon installed globally in the system, so that's why I'm able to run it without installing it as an npm package. I installed it globally a while back. So as you can see, our app is running successfully, because as you can see from the terminal, it says server running on port 5000. So there are no issues with our server and everything is working fine. And what this means is we can now integrate Mongoose into our project. That is, we can now connect to the MongoDB Atlas database. To do that, just below the middleware we have right here, I can write a comment that says connect to MongoDB Atlas. Let's spell Atlas properly. Atlas. Yeah, so to do this, I'm going to call a couple of commands. The first is the mongoose.set and mongoose.connect. As you can see above, we already imported mongoose, which allows us to connect to the MongoDB Atlas. So I can just say mongoose.set, and then it's going to have an argument of strict query. I mean, you don't need to memorize this stuff. Like, if you check the documentation of Mongoose, you are bound to see it there. So instead of probably typing it out, you can just do that. And then the other mongoose command we need is mongoose.connect rather. So mongoose.connect is going to require us accessing the MongoDB URL inside of the .env file. And how do we get this? So we need to head back to the MongoDB Atlas dashboard and we click on connect. So once we click on connect, we need to select one of these options, and the options to select is going to be connect to your application, which is just what we want to do. And then we have various options. We are working with Node.js, so in this drop down we select Node.js. If you are working with other applications or other programming languages rather, you can go ahead and select them. But for our projects, we go with Node.js, and the version is 4.1 or later. If you are using a previous version of Node.js, you can select that if you want. And then we need to grab this particular URL. This serves as our MongoDB URL. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to close and head back to our Node.js application. And the next step is to head to our .env file. So this file is very important, and this file is where we are going to paste our Mongo URL. So the thing to take note of here is our password is also going to come into play here, like the password I told us to remember when we're creating a new user. So I need to create the Mongo URL variable here. So I'm going to say mongo underscore URL. The convention here is to always use uppercase to define the variables. So I'm going to paste in the MongoDB URL we copied, and here where we have the password, you're going to remove this, and then you're going to remove the bracket as well, and then enter your own password. That is, type your password there. So for me, I'm going to type my password in. So as you can see, I've just replaced the password text we have there and then type in my password. So with this, we can easily connect to the Mongo URL. So I believe you've done the same as well, and you can head back to the server.js, and in the mongoose.connect, you can now make use of the process.env.mongo underscore. In fact, let me copy it because I don't want to make any mistake. We call the variable mongo underscore URL, so I'm gonna do that here. So dot mongo underscore URL, and then it takes an extra argument which is going to be inside an object, and we need to set the URL, the new URL parser. So I'm gonna say use new URL parser, which you can feel free to check the documentation. I'm going to set it to true, and then it returns a callback. So we need to subscribe to this callback. So to do that, I'm going to say dot then. So this helps us to handle the error and also to help us know if there's a successful connection. So I'm going to make use of the arrow function, and then I'm going to say console.log MongoDB is connected. This is going to show on the terminal if MongoDB is successfully connected. So that's for that part. And then as the convention, in case of an error, we need to catch the error. So I'm going to say dot catch, and dot catch is going to have a callback function as well. So I'm going to pass in the argument of error and then make use of the arrow function. And within the arrow function, I can just console log the error that might pop off. Console.log, I think we have an argument. I can just pass in the argument that says error. So I'm going to save, and I think with this we can check the terminal to know if there is an error or not. As you can see, there is an error, authentication failed. The reason for that is anytime you change anything in the .env file, you need to stop the server and start it, because it doesn't auto update in the server. The server doesn't recognize any change you make. You need to stop the server and then restart the server, and I think probably this should work this time around. So I'm going to type in node mon server.js, see server running on port 5000, but the error persists. It says bad auth. I think probably I entered the wrong password. Let me confirm that. Yes, my password is sort of wrong, and I just corrected that. I didn't type in the password properly. So that's one of the validations the connection to the MongoDB Atlas has. So maybe it's worked this time around, because I believe that's the right password. And as you can see, we have MongoDB connected. So I've successfully connected our application to the MongoDB Atlas database. So anytime we try to push anything, or anytime we try to create an API to post a data, it should reflect in this particular database. And we can always access that in the browse collections button. But for now, since we've not posted anything, I don't think I'll check that out. We'll do that in due course, but for now we can proceed with this tutorial. So the next step is to configure our model. So as you can see, we have a model folder, and inside of the model folder, I can just create a file called avatar.js. So within this model, before I proceed, I think since we have just a single model, I'm just gonna remove the s at the end of this model folder and just have it as model without the s, singular. So we need to bring in a particular npm package here, and that's called mongoose. So I'm gonna say const Mongoose, because this is also connecting to our MongoDB Atlas database. So I'm going to require it here. So Mongoose equals to require Mongoose, and then I'm going to create a variable called schema. So the schema serves as the way we expect our data to appear in the database. For instance, anytime we upload a file, the file should have a name, the file should have an avatar, that is, it should be in form of an image, and then it should also have an ID and as well as a timestamp, that is the time at which we uploaded the data into the database. This is not really compulsory. I think for this tutorial, I'm going to include the timestamp. It might be useful later on in the future. So I'm going to say const schema is equals to mongoose, which is the variable we created above, mongoose.schema. So with that, we can now set up the schema by creating one more variable, and that is const avatar schema is equals to new schema, which comes in form of an object. And now we can start configuring the fields. So the first field is the name field, and it's going to have a type as well as a required field. So the type is going to be of type string, and then the required, that is if the field in the UI is going to be allowed to be left as empty, that is anytime you want to upload it or post it to the database, it must always contain a field for the name key. We set it as true. We can just duplicate this two more times. So the next one is going to be called avatar. So I'm going to say avatar, which is going to be a type of string as well. I made an error here. The string is not supposed to be in quotes, supposed to be uppercase string, just like we have it right here. And for the avatar, it's also required, because I mean, if you can't upload an avatar, why are we creating this application? And the Cloudinary ID is also going to be required. That is, each time we upload an avatar, it should have a Cloudinary ID. And the next stage of this project would be setting up Cloudinary, but for now, let's just create the schema, that is the model for the data. And then with the Cloudinary ID, I think we're good to go. But what we just need to do next is to create this timestamp, like I said. So I'm gonna do that within here. So I'm gonna say timestamps. I'm gonna set it to true. Now we need to export our schema. So to export this schema, we need to make use of the module.export, and then we're gonna say mongoose dot model, and then it has two arguments. The first argument will be the name it will be called in our database, which is going to be avatar, and then we pass in the avatar schema, which we created right here. So what I mean in actual fact is anytime we click on browse collection and we try to, in fact, let me click on this browse collection right now. Anytime we click on it and then we try to see the collection of data we've uploaded, for now it's empty. It's going to be within an avatar collection, like it's going to be called avatar, just like we have right here. So that's what it means. So with that, we can save our avatar schema model and then close it up. So I think the next step is to configure Cloudinary. So to configure Cloudinary, we need to have a Cloudinary account, because we're gonna need some data in the Cloudinary dashboard, data such as the cloud name, the API key, and then as well as the API secret. So quickly I head back to the browser, and then I already have the website opened up. As you can see, you can just head straight to cloudinary.com and then click on login. I have an account with them using Google, so I'm going to click on login with Google, and then it's going to navigate me to the page where I need to enter my email address. So I'm going to click on my email address, and then it navigates me to the dashboard. So if you don't have a Cloudinary account, make sure you go ahead and set one up, and then you should have a dashboard similar to mine. So as you can see on the landing page of the dashboard, you have the important data we need, like the API key, the API secrets, as well as the cloud name. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to head straight to our env file we have right here, and right below the Mongo URL variable, I'm going to create a new variable called cloudinary underscore cloud underscore name. And then the next variable I'm going to create is going to be the API key. So I can just say cloudinary underscore API underscore key. And then the final variable we need to create is for the API secret. So I'm going to say cloudinary underscore API underscore secret. So we can now grab this from the Cloudinary dashboard. The first one is a cloud name. I'm going to copy the cloud name and then paste it right here. And the next one is the API key. I will copy that as well and then paste it right here. And finally, the API secret. We're going to grab that as well and then paste it right here. And then we can save. And with that, we have our Cloudinary data configured in the .env file. So the next step is to head straight to our config folder. This is where we have our Cloudinary file configured. So to do that, I'm going to create a new file called cloudinary.js. So within the cloudinary.js file, we need to import the Cloudinary package, which we installed at the beginning of this Node.js application. So I'm going to say const cloudinary as an I, and then I'm going to say is equals to require cloudinary. But Cloudinary has various versions, but for this project we're making use of version 2, so I'm going to say dot version 2. And next we need to use our variable right here to create an object. So I'm going to say cloudinary dot config. So this object is going to take in 3 arguments: the cloud name, the API key, and the API secret. So I'm going to say cloud underscore name. I'm going to configure this by saying process.env. When I open my .env file, we have the cloudinary cloud name here. So I'm going to paste it right here. And then the next one is the API secret. So I'm going to say API. Let's go with the API key next. So I'm going to say API key process.env.cloudinary underscore API underscore key. And finally, we have the API secret. So I'm going to say API underscore secret. So we're going to have cloudinary underscore API underscore secret. So I'm going to paste that right here. And I think that's all we need to do. But I have a disclaimer here. So this should be the best practice, like the best way to go about this, but for some reason my application while creating this couldn't access the process.env in this particular cloudinary.config, and I noticed it was causing a lot of issues when I was making research. So the solution I came up with is to paste the API keys directly inside of this file. So what do I mean by this? So instead of having the process.env.cloudinary name, so I'm going to paste in the values for this, copy this, paste it here, and then the same thing I'm going to apply for the API key. So I'm going to clear what we have right here and then copy the API key and then paste it in directly. And finally, we have the API secret. So I'm going to copy the API secret and then paste it in. So what I did, however, because this is not like best practice, because this data are not supposed to be pushed to version control like GitHub. So what I did was to include it in the git ignore file. So I included the config folder in the git ignore file. So to do that, I just did /config. So anytime we push, our data doesn't get pushed to version control. And I also need to avoid pushing node modules as well. So node underscore modules, because it's heavy and we don't push this sort of folder into the version control by default and for best practice purposes, and it's not in the relevant folder. Nobody wants to copy the node modules folder into their project while cloning a project. So with this, our data remains secure because it doesn't get pushed into version control. So with that, Cloudinary is now configured in this project, and we can now move on to the next step. So the next step in this project is we're going to create the Multer middleware, which allows us to upload our form data and files. So to do that, I'm going to go to the middleware folder and then create a new file called multer.js, which is also the name of the package. So we start off by importing or requiring Multer. So I'm going to say const Multer is equals to require Multer. So next up, you can check out the Multer documentation and try to see what it's about. It makes things probably easy for you to follow in this tutorial. But the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to create a local public directory in this project, and to do that, let me just type in this command that says file upload folder. So every file we upload will get uploaded into this particular directory. So I'm going to say const dir is equals to dot public. Not only are we saving the image in Cloudinary and in the MongoDB Atlas database, we would also be able to see it locally here. I do that because I just want us to see the power of Node.js, that this kind of thing is possible. So you don't need to do this, like it's not necessary, but it's something I just decided to do anyways. So the next thing is to create a storage variable which comes in form of an object. So I'm gonna say const storage, and that will be is equals to Multer dot disk storage. So the disk storage is where the object gets configured, and the first thing we need to create here is the destination, and then it has a callback function. So this callback function has three arguments. The first one is the request argument, the file argument, and then the cb argument. All these are probably in the documentation, you can check it out. And out of these three arguments, all we need here is the cb. I'm just going to pass in two arguments to it as well. So the first one is null, and then the second one is the directory which we want to upload this particular local image uploads I was talking about not quite long ago. So the second object takes in the file name. So I'm going to say file name, in lowercase. File name also comes in form of a callback, and then takes in the the request, the file, and the cb argument. So I'm going to create a variable within it, and I'm going to say file name. What we are trying to do here is we are trying to convert the file name that gets uploaded of the avatars. We're going to convert them to lowercase, so anytime we save them into our database, they are consistent in that manner. So I'm going to say file dot original name dot to lowercase dot split, and the splits gonna have a space within the quotes right there, and then dot join, and then with that we now return the cv arguments, and then passing null as well as the file name. I didn't spell that properly, it's uppercase N. So with that, we've configured the storage variable. The last thing we need to do is to export our middleware. So to do that, we need to make use of module.export. So this allows us to export our Multer configuration. So I'm going to say module.export is equals to Multer, and then within this we're going to have an object, and the first thing we need to do is to pass in the storage. So this storage argument, or variable rather, we created above, so I'm going to pass it right here. And then the next thing we need to do is to create a file filter key. So I'm going to say file filter. So this is going to take in a callback function as well. So we're going to be requests just like the previous ones, file, and then the cb argument. So we just want to ensure that it's only images that are being uploaded, that is png and jpeg images are being uploaded. So I'm going to say if, which is a conditional statement. So I'm going to say if the file dot mime type is equals to image forward slash png, or, so I'm going to repeat this two more times instead of typing it out. So if the file dot mime type is equals to image dash png, or if the file dot mime type is equals to image dash jpg, and then finally if the file dot mime type is equals to image forward slash jpeg, then what we want to do is to return this cb argument we have right there. So we'll set it as true, so null and true, that is the image type is accepted. If the image type is none of these particular images, that is neither png, jpg, or jpeg, we can set the cb argument as false. So I'm going to say cb comma false, and then we return an error as well. So we can just say return cb and then new error, and the error message is going to be only .png, .jpg, .jpeg formats are allowed. So we are sorry, we can only accept those type of file formats. So upload that, don't upload something else. So That's the configuration for our Multer middleware. So the final thing we need to do here is to configure our API routes, and this is going to be done in the routes directory which we've created earlier. So I'm going to open up the routes directory and create a new file, and the name of the file is going to be upload routes.js. So I'm going to close the Multer file. So in the upload routes.js, we're going to import quite a bit of npm packages from Express to the router to the Express async handler, Cloudinary, as well as the middlewares we created earlier, the model as well. So let's start with that. So the first thing is going to be const express. It goes to require express. We've done that earlier in this project. Const. The next is router. So I'm gonna make use of the express routes. Const routes router equals to express.router, and then next one is the express async handler. So I'm gonna say async handler is equals to require express dash async dash handler, and then we need to import cloudinary as well. So I'm gonna say const cloudinary is equals to require, not require cloudinary this time around. Actually, we need to import it from the config, that is the configuration we just did. So it's gonna be /config/cloudinary. So we're importing that particular file. Then we need to upload, so we need to import the Multer middleware as well. So I'm gonna say const upload is equals to require middleware /Multer, and then finally we need to import the models, that is the schema we created. So I'm going to say const avatar is equals to require model /avatar. So that's all we need to import. So the next thing we're going to do is to create a REST API to add file to the database. So to do that, we're going to make use of a post request. So we can make use of the Express router to do that. But first, let me add this comment that says post request, then upload files. Then I can now say router.posts, and then it's going to take some arguments. The first argument it's going to take is the route name, which is going to be /add, because we're trying to add a new file to the database, that is an avatar to the database. Then we can now type in upload.single, and then we can call this avatar. This will come into play later on in the front end when we try to consume this REST API. So once we do that, finally we can now pass in the sync handler variable we created above to help us handle our asynchronous requests, and then we can now say async. Then it's going to take an arrow function which has two arguments as well. As first is request, and then the response, it has to come in that particular order. Now we can make use of the try catch block to continue our configuration. So I can just open a bracket and then type create the try block and then the catch block as well. The catch block would have an error argument, and it will help us log any error we have probably in the console. So I can just say console.log and then pass in the error. So now within the try block, let's try to implement. Okay, there's an error here. I need to get rid of the arrow. So within the try block, we need to implement the functionality to add the file to the database. And let's also remember, we are also trying to save the files we upload, that is the images we upload, to Cloudinary as well. So the first thing I need to do is to create a variable that helps us to handle that particular functionality. So I can just say const results is equals to await, since we're making use of async await. So I can just say cloudinary dot uploader dot upload, and then we pass in the file path. So I can just say request dot file dot path. So we need to see the result this brings about, that is because later on we need to pass in some results from this particular response in as payloads into the body of our request. To do that, let's try to see the results we're going to get from Cloudinary once we try to send data to Cloudinary. So I'm just going to type in rest.json and then I can just say results. So I can save. So to try this out, we also need to export this particular API. So to do that, I'm going to make use of module.export, and I'm going to say is equals to router. So this helps us to export the express router, and we need to head to our server JS file, which allows us to test out that particular endpoint. So to do that, I'm going to create a new variable here, and the variable I'm going to call it images. So I'm going to say const images is equals to, so I need to import the router here. So I can just say require, and within the require I can just say dot forward slash route forward slash upload routes. So making use of app.use in Express, I can just say app.use, and then I pass in the first argument, which is going to be the base of our endpoint. So I'm going to call it forward slash API, and then we pass in the images variable we created above. So I'm going to say images, and then I save everything we've done so far. With this, we should be able to test our endpoint that is trying to see the results. And to do that, we need to head to the browser, and like I said earlier in the introductory part of the video, we'll be making use of something called Talent API Tester. So to install this, just type in Talent API Tester on Google, and it's a plugin. I already have it installed actually, so you might need to do that as well. So I'll just show you how to do this. So once you click on Talent API Tester, you can just click on this particular result. It's free. There's a free version, and then it asks you to add to Chrome, but because I already added it, it says remove from Chrome. For you, if you don't have it installed already, you can just click on add to Chrome. And also you can use something else, like you can make use of Postman to do this, but for me, I consider Postman to be sort of heavy, and since we're just testing out REST APIs, I think this particular tool is enough to implement what we want. So once you install it, you should have an icon in your toolbar right here, and then once you click on the icon, that particular Chrome plugin, that is the Talent API Tester Chrome plugin, pops up. And as you can see on the left sidebar, some of the projects I've created previously are right here, and so I'm going to create a new project, and then I'll show you how to do that, and then we can start testing out all the endpoints. So in total, I think we would need about 5 endpoints. So to do that, the first thing I need to do is to click on this icon right here, and then it says add project. So I'm going to click on add project, then it asks for the project name. I'm going to call it main-avatar, because what we're trying to create is an application that deals with uploading of avatar. So I'm going to click on create, and then it presents us with three different buttons, which are add a service, add a scenario, and add a request. For us, we're going to click on add a request. So as you can see, it says request one right here, so we can name this request. So what we're trying to do is try to add an avatar. So I can just say add avatar. That will be the name for this request. So anytime we come back to this particular project, we would be able to remember. So I can just click on open request, and it's a post request. So I'm going to change this from get to post, and then I'm going to clear the input field you have right there, and then I'm going to type in http colon forward slash localhost, which is the name of our server, localhost colon 5000, which is our port number. So I'm going to say forward slash API forward slash add, and then we can now query this request. And to do that, we need to send a payload to the body of the request. So I'm going to change this from text, I'm going to change it to form, and then I'm going to click on add form parameter. So the form parameter is going to be the name we give our API right here, that is upload.single, which is avatar. So I'm going to copy this avatar, and it asks us if we want to input a text or a file. I'm going to select file, and then I can click on choose file and select a file which is an avatar. So I can just select one of these avatars right here, probably click on this particular one, and then click on open. Now we can send the request to see the response we get. So for now, let me check if our server is still running on the back end. So it's still running, so I'm going to click on send, and we get a response that says, we get a result that says no response. Let me check the server. It says file.original name to local case. I think there's an error there, and that's in Multer.js. So I'm going to head back to Multer.js and then see what the issue is. So the original name is supposed to be lowercase n, not uppercase n. So I'm going to save, and I believe our server should restart automatically thanks to NodeMon. So I'm going to click on send once more and let's see if we get any response. And as you can see, we're able to get a response, and it contains objects with so many keys and values. So some of the things we need here includes the secure URL and the public ID. So we need this public ID, we need this secure URL. So I'm going to use the request.body to extract these particular values. And to understand what's going on here, the secure URL is the image we just uploaded, we just added to the request body. So for instance, if I try to copy this particular secure URL, if I copy it and then open a tab in the browser and paste it in and try to search for that, let me do that now. And then if I click enter, you can see it shows that particular avatar. So it's sending it to Cloudinary and then it's returning a response which we can use as part of the payload of the body of our request. So to proceed, the next step is to try and add this particular data to our MongoDB database. So to do that, I'm going to create a new object variable and I'm going to say create uploads. This helps us to create the files to upload. So I'm going to say let image uploads. I can call it anything. I can probably say let avatar uploads, but let's use image since it's still an image. So I'm going to say let image uploads is equals to new avatar, and this is from our model. Remember, we created our model earlier which has a schema of name, avatar, Cloudinary ID. We need to pass data to this particular schema. So to do that, I'm going to open a bracket, and within this bracket we can start configuring it. So we can now say name, and then we can pass in request.body.name, and then we can also say avatar. So the avatar is going to take in request.body.secure URL, which is our actual image coming from the response from Cloudinary, which we have right here. So I'm just going to grab this secure URL, I'm going to copy it and then paste it right there. And then the next thing we need to grab is the Cloudinary ID, and that will be from the public underscore ID. So let me copy this public underscore ID. I can just say Cloudinary underscore ID, and then I can just pass in results dot public ID. This is supposed to be results dot secure URL, not request.body, because it's not coming from the request.body, it's coming from the result Cloudinary returns anytime we upload the file. So be passing that particular result, as you can see. Now next up, we need to save our data to the database, that is the MongoDB Atlas database. So to do that, I'm gonna create a new comment and say save uploads to MongoDB Atlas, and then we can create a variable. So I'm gonna say const created image, that is, we've already created the images and we just want to save them to the database. Now I can just say await image uploads, this variable we have right here. I'm gonna copy it instead of typing it out, so I can just paste it here and say image uploads dot save. That's all we need to do. So once we pass in the save method, I can just return a response that says res.status, and then we can pass in an HTTP code of 201 that is created. That means stands for created. I can just return our response as JSON and say JSON, and then pass in the particular variable which we created above, which is created images. So with this, I think our API is fully created, and if I save and test this out, we should see the save data in MongoDB as well as Cloudinary. So I would love for us to do that right now. So let's head back to Talent API tester, and this time around we would need two form parameters. So the first one we've already added here, which is the avatar. The second one is the name, which is what we configured in the schema, if you can remember. So you can just give this is in form of text, so I can just give this a name of testing 1, and I think that's all we need to do, and we can proceed to test out this particular endpoint. So basically what's going on here is in the request.body, in the image uploads variable here, our name is going to pass in whatever we type into this particular input field, which is testing1, is going to get extracted thanks to the request.body.name, and then the avatar is going to be whatever we get from the result of the Cloudinary, which is the secure URL and the public underscore ID, as you can see here. So everything is going to get data passed into them. So with that, we can see the images in both Cloudinary as well as MongoDB Atlas. So I'm going to click on send right now, and let's see if we get a successful response. And yeah, we got a successful response. So to know if this is actually correct, what I'm going to do is I'm going to head straight to MongoDB Atlas, and then I'm going to refresh the database, and let's see if it gets saved to this particular database. So I'm going to close this sidebar so we can see more properly. And yes, as you can see, we now have the ID, the name, the avatar, and Cloudinary ID. The created art and updated art is also showing here as well. There are the dates field. So we now have all the data we need, and this particular image, which is the avatar, is also showing. Everything is showing the way it should. So we can now save uploads into the MongoDB Atlas database. So I'm going to quickly also check the Cloudinary dashboard. So what I can do is I can go to media library, and let's see if we have the image right there. As you can see, both images we have tested so far are showing. These two are the newly, as you can see, we have this new badge showing right here, and you can see everything is now working fine, and we're able to save or post a particular avatar to the database as well to Cloudinary dashboard. So the next REST API we need to create is the REST API to get data. So is that one is going to be a get request. We just want to get all the uploads we've created. So to do that, I'm going to go to a new line, and then I'm going to type in a comment that says get uploads, get uploaded files, and then still making use of the Express router, I'm going to say router.get, and then for this I'm just going to use the / without adding any name, and then we don't need to pass in our Multer middleware right here. I can just say make use of the sync handler directly, and just say a sync handler, and then pass in the sync keyword, and we can now proceed to pass in the request and the response fat arrow function. And within here we'll still make use of the try catch block. So I'm going to open the try as well as the catch block, which has an argument of error. Then we console log the error. So we can now start our implementation. I think this one is pretty much straightforward. To make use of a MongoDB method called .find. So what do I mean by this? I can just say let's created image. Let's created image. It's equals to await avatar dot find, which is a MongoDB method. Like I told you earlier, it's going to help us find all the results in the database, and I'm going to return our response as JSON by typing res.json, and then we pass in the created image. That's all we need to do here. So I'm going to save, and then we can test this out in Talend API tester. And to do this, I'm going to create a new request. So I'm going to click on this icon in our main avatar project, and I'm going to click on add request. So I click on save and continue. So this is going to be a get request. I'm going to leave it that way. And also I'm going to grab everything we have in the add avatar input box we have right there, and then paste it here. So this time around it's just going to be / API, because endpoints we just did / so we didn't give it a specific name, so it's going to be just / API. And because it's a get request, we don't need to pass in any payload right here. So what I can do is I can just rename this and say get all uploads, get all avatars rather, and then I can click on OK. So let's try to send this particular request. So I'm going to click on the send button, and as you can see, we have only one result in the database, and that's what is showing here. So our get request works successfully. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new file, and then I'll try to get the file as well. So what I'm going to do is for the post requests, I'm going to change the avatar to file, and then choose a new file and probably upload one of the avatars we have right here. So I'm going to go with this particular avatar, and then send this particular request, and then head back to the get all avatar, and then send the request. Now we should have two results. Yeah, as you can see, we have two results. So get all avatar works perfectly well. So the next endpoint we are going to create is to get a file by its ID. So that is, we want to get a single file or a single avatar. So I'm going to create a new endpoint, and let's add a comment that says get a specific file. So to get a specific file, we start by making use of the express router. So router.get, and this time around it's going to be forward slash colon id, because we need to pass in the id, and then we need to make use of the arrow. And once we do this, we make use of the try catch block as we've done so many times already. So I can just console log this error, and then we can start our implementation within the try block. So what we need to do is we need to make use of the parameters to do this particular, to make this particular request. That is, we need to find by id, and to get the id we need to extract it from the url parameters. And to do that, I'm going to create a variable, and let's add a comment that says find upload by id. So the variable is going to be created image. So let's created image is equals to await, because we're making use of sync await. So I'm going to say await avatar dot find by id, and then we need to pass in the request dot params dot id. This helps us to extract the route parameters from the API request. So what we need to do next is just to return our response in JSON format. So I'm just going to say response res.json and then pass in the created image. So I'm going to save and head back to Talent API tester and create a new request. Let me change the name from here. So this request is going to be called get avatar by id. So I'm going to say get avatar by id, and it's also a guest request, so I'm going to leave it that way. And then url is going to be http colon forward slash localhost 5000 forward slash api forward slash. Then for the forward slash, we need to pass in the id we have, as you can see in this particular database, and the id we'll be passing is what we have right here. To the API URL, we can get the data for this particular request. So I'm gonna do that, and then I click on send, and as you can see, we get that particular response alone. So that's called testing one. So I'm gonna save. So if I go back to the first REST API we created, which is called add avatar, I can just call this testing 3, and then the avatar is going to be a file. Choose a file, and then probably add this particular avatar, and then click on send. So this has been created, and I can get all the avatars. We now have 3 avatars. So I'm gonna try to get the id of the one called testing 3, which we just created. So I'm gonna copy it and then head straight to get avatar by id. I'm gonna change the id to the testing 3 id, and when we check the results, we can see we have the data for testing 3. So now we can say we've successfully created the endpoint id. So the next one is to update the avatar. So to update the avatar, I'm going to grab everything in the first request we created, which is the post request to add an avatar. So I'm going to grab everything right there because it's sort of similar. So we'll just make some specific changes. So the first change we're going to make is from the comments. So I'm just going to say update file. So to update file, this is going to be a put request. The rest has been posts for the uploading of the REST API. To get all the API, we made use of get request. To get a specific upload, we made use of the get request as well. But this time it's going to be put. So because we want to update the particular uploads we made, that is, we want to update that particular avatar. So it's going to be forward slash update forward slash colon id, because it also needs to make use of the id in the REST API, that is the route parameters. Within the try and the catch block, which in the catch block we are still returning the error. So in the try block, we need to start by creating a new variable. So the new variable we need to create needs to help us to find the particular upload, the particular avatar we want to update. We need to extract so I can just say let's image uploads is equals to await avatar dot find by id, and then we can pass in request dot params dot id. That's all we need to do. And then next up, okay, we have 2 variables clashing, two variables with the same name. I'm going to change that later on. Next up, we need to remove the ID of the image we uploaded that we want to update, then uploading the new image so that it can be replaced with a new file entirely. So to do that, I need to make use of a destroy method in Cloudinary. So what I can do is I can just say await Cloudinary dot uploader dot destroy, and then I can pass in the Cloudinary ID for that. So all I need to do is just to say image uploads dot Cloudinary underscore ID. That's the Cloudinary ID for the current image that is yet to be uploaded. So next, we need to extract the name from the request.body. So to do that, I can just say const, then make use of brackets right here and say request.body. So it's just similar to saying const name equals to request.body.name. So it's another way of writing it. I think this way seems more simpler and elegant. So it's something you should be aware about. So you can just extract the name from the object. So next up, we need to create our updated data, the data we want to update. So instead of having this particular variable we have here to create the uploads, so I can just say update uploads, and I'm going to change this from image uploads. I'm going to change it to data updates. So we still need to follow this convention, that is, it has to have this particular schema, that is the name, the avatar, and the Cloudinary ID. But this time around, we just need to pass in the extracted name, so which we extracted from the request.body. So I can just pass in the name directly, just like we have right here. And then in an event where is not able to get the name, we can just use the previous name by saying image uploads dot name, and then same thing applies for the avatar we want to upload as well. So you can just say request.url or request.secure url, or we pass in the previous image we've already uploaded. So I can just say uploads.avatar, and then for the Cloudinary as well, I can just make use of the or operator and say image uploads.Cloudinary ID. So I'm gonna proceed and then move to the final part. So what we want to do is to find by ID and update. So that's the last step we need to take. So I'm going to change this comment that says save uploads to MongoDB Atlas. It's going to be update uploads. So update uploads, and we need to change this particular variable to image uploads. I'm just going to say image uploads, and then we can now say await avatar dot find by ID and updates, and it's a method in MongoDB, and we can now pass in the ID of the newly uploaded files. So I can just say request.params.id, then I pass in the variable we create here, that is the data of the new updates. So I can just pass in there as well. And finally, we need MongoDB know it's a new update, so I can just pass in this particular object and just say new, and then say it's true. So I set it to true, and then what we're trying to do here, actually, we need to remove this const and proceed to leave it this way, because we're trying to update this particular variable we have here to this particular to take on this new particular data. So I'm going to leave it this way, and then finally I'm going to pass in this image upload variable to return our response as JSON. So it's going to be res.status 201.json. So with that, our newly uploaded file, if successful, return a JSON object. So we can test this out in Talend API tester by heading to the browser and then creating a new request. So I'm going to click on add request, and then I'm going to change this request name to update avatar, and then I'm going to paste in the URL for our request, and this is going to be put like we did in our file. So it's a put request, and then it's going to be /API/updates, and then the particular data we want to update. So probably let me refresh this database to get our latest data. So I'll update the data for testing 3. So let's see how it's going to be like. As you can see, testing 3 has this particular avatar. So let me copy the avatar and let's see how it looks in the browser. Let's see the image in the browser. So this is the image for avatar 3, for testing 3 rather. So what I'll do is I'll try to update this and then I'll try to see if it gets updated. So back to Talent API tester, our body of our request is coming in form of form, and then we add the parameter. The first parameter is avatar. Either the name or the avatar can come first. So the avatar is usually the file, so I'm going to choose a new file and then probably pass in this particular avatar and then add a new form, and then the body for this form is going to be the name and it's a text format, and I can say testing 4, or no, testing 3 updates. Let's call it testing 3 updates to be sure it's properly updated. I think we need to grab the ID for testing 3 as well, which is this. I'm going to add it to the URL and then I'm going to click on send. Let's see if it gets successfully posted, and we got a successful response. Okay, let me refresh the database and let's see if it gets updated. And for some reason the name doesn't get updated. It still says testing 3 despite the fact that I changed the name to testing 3 updates. Let me check, probably we made an error somewhere. But meanwhile, let's check if the image also gets updated. So I'm gonna grab the avatar image we have right here for testing 3 and then paste it in the browser. It doesn't get updated, but it returns a successful response, which I find very strange. So what I think could be happening is probably this let variable is restricting the updated data we pass from getting this data. This updated data is restricting it from getting into this particular argument. So it's just setting the previously uploaded data, that is the image.uploads, the image uploads.avatar, as well as the image uploads.cloudinary ID, instead of setting the new result, which is the name result.secure URL and the result of public ID. I think that's what's actually happening. So let me remove the let keyword that sets the variable and limits the scope of the data. I'm going to get rid of this rest.json result as well, and let's save and try again. I think that's what's actually happening. The scope, the let keyword is restricting the scope of the newly updated data. So I'm gonna send this request one more time, and I think we might have an error in our server. Okay, MongoDB server error on ID would modify immutable field. Okay, plan executor error during find ID and modify. Okay, let's check our code. Another thing I noticed we're trying to do is we don't need to pass in this new keyword you have right here, new avatar. I think what we're trying to do is, by saying new avatar, we're trying to create a new record, which is not what we're trying to do. We are trying to update the record, not create a new record. So I think that's part of the reason why we are getting the error. So I'm going to check the server if it's running properly. So the server is running properly and we're connected to MongoDB. So I'm gonna head back to our requests in Talent API tester, and I'm gonna send the request and let's see if it works this time around. Yeah, as you can see, it works and the newly updated avatar is created. You can see we have testing 3 updates, that is testing 3 has been updated, and let's see if the image doesn't show, if the avatar doesn't show this particular one in the database. So let me refresh the database and then close this sidebar we have right here. When I scroll to the bottom, as you can see, testing 3 updates is now being passed, and if I grab the URL for the newly updated avatar, it should be the one we updated it to. Yeah, just we have right here. So our update is now working successfully. So the last endpoint we need to create is the endpoints to delete an avatar. So I think that one is pretty much straightforward. So I'm gonna create a new comment, and then it's gonna be delete file. So this is gonna be a delete request. So I'm gonna say router dot delete, and then router dot delete would take in /delete /:ID as well, because we need to get the ID of the user. So I'm gonna pass in the Express async handler. So say async handler, and then pass in async, and as well as the request and the response. So once again, we make use of the try catch block. So try as well as catch, and then we console log the error. So within the try block, we need to get the user of the ID of the user. So I can just say const image uploads ID. Let's include the ID. Image uploads ID is equals to await avatar dot find, because we're trying to find by ID. So avatar dot find by ID, and then we pass in request dot params dot ID. So that's the first step. We've been able to get the ID, so we can now make use of uploader.destroy method in Cloudinary. So I can just do await Cloudinary.uploader.destroy, and then we need to pass in the ID. So I'm just going to say image uploads dot Cloudinary ID. So it deletes that particular user from Cloudinary, and then we need to delete it from MongoDB as well. So I need to make use of the remove method in MongoDB. All I need to do is just to say await image uploads id dot remove. So it traces that particular record and it deletes it. Then we can return a response in JSON format by saying res.json, and we can pass a message that says avatar deleted successfully, and then save. I think that's all we need to do, and we can test this out. So to test this out, I'm going to check how many records we currently have in the database. We currently have 3 records in the MongoDB database, and most of the requests we've made so far, before we started connecting to the database, I've gone to Cloudinary. So we have lots of images in Cloudinary already, but this time around, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all the testing 3 records. So let me do that. So all I need to do is to grab the ID at first. So let me scroll down and get the ID of testing 3, and then head to the Talend API tester, create a new request, and this request is going to be called delete avatar, and then it's going to be a delete request. So I changed that to delete request, and it's going to be /delete /the ID we copied from the database, which is going to be this. And then I think that's all we need to do. I can just click on send, and let's see if that record is successfully deleted. Okay, I think we need to check our server. We might have an error somewhere. Missing required parameter public ID. Let me check that. Oh, it's supposed to be Cloudinary underscore ID, not just Cloudinary. We didn't pass in the Cloudinary ID, so I think that's an error from our part. So let's make the new request again, and as you can see, we get a successful response, and the message gets displayed on the body, and it says avatar deleted successfully. To confirm this, if I go to the MongoDB Atlas database and I refresh, I think the number of records we have this time around should reduce by 1. As you can see, we now have 2 records in database, so I can proceed to delete this record that has this particular ID as well, because now we have a record that has testing 1 and testing 1, the same name. So let's delete one of the names. So I'm gonna pass that, and then I'm gonna send it to the server. And also let's refresh our Cloudinary dashboard, and let's see the data that has been deleted. I think this is a bit confusing, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to delete all the records in Cloudinary, and let's try to upload a new data to the database. I'll delete this one as well, all the avatar we've uploaded recently, because before we connected it to the database, we already uploading to the avatar dashboard. Now that the avatar dashboard is empty, and I think I'm going to empty the results in MongoDB as well, so I'm going to delete this particular document, and then we have 0 documents both in MongoDB Atlas as well as Cloudinary. So we can now add a new request. So this time around we are starting from scratch, so I'm going to change the text to file and then choose a file. So let's upload an avatar. So I'm going to upload this. I'm going to click on send. Well, it gets uploaded successfully, so I'm going to check the Cloudinary dashboard as well as MongoDB Atlas. As you can see, we have that record in MongoDB Atlas, and let me check Cloudinary. We have the image in Cloudinary as well. So what I'm going to do next is try and update this particular avatar. So I'm going to click on update avatar, and then I'm going to change the ID we have right here to the ID we have in the database. So I'm going to grab this particular ID, paste it in, and then I'm going to change the file from this to probably this particular avatar, and then the name is going to be called testing1 updated. and then I'm going to click on send. So it's been updated. So let me refresh the Cloudinary dashboard to see if the avatar with the hijab gets updated, and I'm going to refresh the database as well in MongoDB Atlas to see if it's updated. As you can see, it's updated in our Cloudinary database, so it works perfectly fine. So the last thing I want to do is to delete, to ensure that the delete works properly. So let me try to delete this particular request, this particular avatar. So I'm going to click on delete avatar, and I'm going to pass in the ID. Let me grab it directly from MongoDB Atlas to be sure. So I'm going to pass it in, and then I'm going to click on send. So let's see, we get a successful response. So let me refresh the MongoDB Atlas database as well as Cloudinary. Let's see if it gets deleted from the records. As you can see, it's been deleted both in Cloudinary as well as MongoDB Atlas. So with this, we can say our CRUD API works successfully. We can now add avatar. We can now delete an avatar, get all avatars, get avatar by ID, as well as update an avatar. So now what we need to do next is to move to the final part of this tutorial by trying to consume this REST API in our Angular project. All right, everyone, welcome to the third and final part of this tutorial. And in this section, we'll be integrating the REST API into our Angular application. So to get started, the first thing I'm going to do is to generate models for our data. So using the Angular CLI, I'm going to stop the server, and then I'm going to type in ng generate class avatar, and then I'm going to give it a flag of type equals to model. This will generate a new model file for us. As you can see, we now have an avatar.model.ts file. So I open the file in Visual Studio Code, which is right here, and then we need two models here. And the first model we need is the model to get the avatar, and then the second one is to create the avatar. This is just a way of showing how the data is likely to come. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to change this class to interface, and then change the name of this avatar to get avatar, and then I just add the required field. So the first one is the ID, which is going to be of type string. Then we have the name, which is also a type of string. We have the avatar, which gives us a type of string. The Cloudinary ID, Cloudinary underscore ID, that's a string as well as the created at and updated at fields. So the second model we're going to create is for creating an avatar. So I'm going to say export interface create avatar, and within the create avatar we just need the name, which is type of string. We need the avatar, which is also type of string, and then the Cloudinary ID. Remember, in our backend, this is how we designed our schema, so it needs to come in this format. So I'm gonna save, and then I'm gonna close this for now. So now the next thing I'm going to do is to import all the necessary modules we need for this project. That is, for instance, we need to make use of forms, that is reactive forms for this project. So we need to import the module for that. So to do that, I need to head straight to the app.module.cs file. So I'm going to scroll to the app.module.cs file, and then right in the import array, I'm going to bring in the HTTP client module and the reactive forms module. So quickly I type in HTTP client module, and then right below it I also type in the reactive forms module. So the HTTP client module is the module that allows us to communicate with our endpoints, that is our REST APIs. The reactive forms module helps us to handle our forms. So we need to import them. So as you can see, we have the reactive forms module imported, while the HTTP client module, I don't know if it intends to work with this. It seems it's not going to work, so we need to type it out manually. So I'm going to say import HTTP client module from @angular/common/http. So with that I can save, and as you can see, the errors have disappeared because we've imported it properly. So the next thing we need to do is to create the service to list the avatar. So the implementation for communicating with our backend REST API begins from here. So we want to list every avatar we have currently on the database. Currently we just have static data. As you can see, everything here is just static data. If you look at the browser as well, we just have the static data, but we want data in MongoDB Atlas. Currently we have none actually, but I'll add it probably from this API testing tool, which is called talent REST API. So but for now, let's just start with the API consumption. So to do the list avatar, I need to generate a new service. So the command to generate a service is called ng generate service. S stands for service in Angular. So I'm gonna make sure this is within a services folder, and I'm gonna put a forward slash in front of it, and I'm gonna call this service avatar. So I press enter, and the Angular command line interface generates a new service for us, and we can now head straight to the Visual Studio Code and then open up the services file, the avatar.services file. So the first thing we need to do is to import the HTTP client in the constructor. So within the constructor, I'm going to say private HTTP and then call the HTTP client, and then we need to import that. Also, we will need to import the model for getting the avatar, just as we have in the avatar.module.ts file. So we need to import this get avatar model. But before we do that, let's create the REST API to get the avatar. So it's going to be in form of a function. So I'm going to say get avatar, and then we open a bracket, and within this bracket we just need to return this http.get because it's a get request, and then we pass in the required fields. But for now, we want to our get request is of type get avatar, so I need to type in the get avatar right here. So I'm gonna say get avatar. We need to import this get avatar. So to do that, I can just type in import get avatar from forward slash avatar dot model. That's all we need to do. So next we can proceed and open a bracket, and within this bracket we need to pass in our base URL, and I think I would want to configure this base URL in our environment.ts file. So what I need to do is to locate the environment folder, which is right here, and open it up in the environment.ts folder. And because our app is not ready for production, so this is why we are doing it here. So I can just pass in the base URL and then copy the base URL, which I can do in the talent REST API. So the base URL is localhost http 5000 forward slash API. That's the base URL of our application. So I'm gonna paste it right here, and it's supposed to be in quotes. So let me open up a quote. So that's it right there, and then the base URL variable we have here, let me make the RL in uppercase. So now we now have a base URL in our environment.ts file. So to proceed within this bracket, what I can do is I can type in environment, which we need to import. In fact, before I proceed, this needs to be in backticks. So I'm gonna put in a backtick and then make use of the $sign because we're trying to access that particular file. So I'm gonna type in environment dot base URL. I was expecting IntelliSense to give us that, but we need to import it first. So as you can see, environment is imported in line 3, and then I'm going to say dot base URL. So that's the function to get avatars from the database. So to consume this endpoint, we need to move to the list avatar component ts file. So quickly I scroll up, and then in the list avatar component ts file, the first thing I'm going to do is to inject the service in the constructor. So I'm going to say private service of type avatar service, which is the name of our service. We need to import this. It's now imported in line 2. Next step is to create the function to display our data from our server. So I'm going to say display avatar, and within the display avatar I'm going to say this dot service dot get avatar. We're trying to access our service and it doesn't take in any arguments, so I'm just gonna subscribe to it right away because it returns an observable. And so we're gonna have the next and the error. The next is the block where we have the successful response, and the error is the block where we have an error. So what I'm going to do is I'm gonna type in the next observer, and then we're gonna pass in the fat arrow here, and the response is gonna be of type get avatar. So I need to import that as well, which is from our model file. So I've been able to import that through the use of IntelliSense, as you can see right here. So we now make use of the fat arrow, and within this block I can console.log the response. Oh, what's this? So before I save, I need to configure the error observer as well, just in case we have an error. So outside of the next observer block, I'm gonna type in the error, and it's gonna be of type error, and then I can alert an error in this case. So I'm gonna say alert error. So I didn't create a type, so I'm just going to remove this and leave it this way, and we can call this inside this function inside of our ng on init lifecycle hook, so that anytime the page loads we get to see the data. So I'm going to say this dot display avatar, and with this we can save everything we've done and see if we have the data inside of the browser console. So quickly I will have to restart the server of our Angular project by typing ng serve, and then we wait for the project to compile. Now that our project has compiled successfully, I can check the browser and refresh the browser, and then open up the inspect and check the console. So inside of the console, I expect an empty array, which, because we don't have any data in the database, as you can see here, the array is empty. So to ensure that we have data in the database, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this tool to add some avatars to the backend. So quickly, I think we have a pending request here, so I'm just gonna send this direct to the backend. Okay, that request is successful, and I'm gonna add another request to the backend, and this is gonna be a different file. Probably I'm gonna add this particular file, and then I'm gonna send that request. The response is successful as well, and I'm gonna send one more testing one, and then change the file to the lady right here. So we're gonna use that particular avatar. I'm gonna send that as well. I think 3 is enough for now, and then what I'm going to do is to refresh the page one more time, and let's see if there's any change in our data. As you can see, we now have all the 3 data as we added: testing 1, testing 2, and testing 3. All the images from that data is there. So what I'm going to do next is to display this on the browser instead of the static data we have right here. So quickly I head back to the Visual Studio Code. So to do that, I'm going to create a global variable right above, and I'm going to call it avatars, because we are getting all the avatars right here, and I'm going to give it a type of any and set it to an empty array. And then what I'm going to do is within this next observer block, so I'm going to say this dot avatars is equals to res. So this dot avatars now has the data coming from our response. So what we need to do next is to head to our HTML file and then make use of the ngIf directive to loop through the data and then display it on the page. So where we're going to do that is within the class called avatar lists. So within this div, and I'm gonna make use of asterisk to type in ng4, which is equals to let avatar of avatars, which is the variable in our ts file, and then we need to pass the avatar into our src attributes. As you can see right here, the avatar contains the link of the images in our Cloudinary file. So that's what we need to do next. So first I need to get rid of the images which have this static data. So quickly I highlight every one of them. I think it stops right about here. Okay, hopefully, yeah, I think that's it. So I'm gonna clear this static data we have right here, and I'm gonna make use of curly brackets, double curly brackets, and I'm gonna say avatar dot avatar. So I'm gonna save everything we've done so far, and then let's check the browser. As you can see, we now have the avatars in the browser, so I can give them a specific width and height. Probably I can just say the width could be of size 140, as well as the height 140 pixels. So I'm gonna save and close the console in the process, and there you go. So our avatars are now of the right size we want it to be. So we've now successfully integrated the endpoints to list all the avatars in our Angular project. So the next step is to implement the add avatar endpoint, so we're able to add a new avatar. We start off by going straight to the add avatar component. So I'm gonna open this up in the tab right here. So let me close the previous tabs that were opened, so we just have to focus only on the add avatar component. So I'm gonna remove what we have right here, and we need to just quickly have a simple design that allows us to upload, that is add an avatar. So to do that, I'm going to wrap the entire container here around a form tag. So I'm just going to type in form, and then we don't need an action, so I'm going to clear this off. And what we need is a div. We now need to create a div. The form is going to be important when we try to submit our avatar, so it's going to need a form group as well as an ng submit event handler. But for now, let's just create the UI. So now I'm going to open a div, and it's going to have a class of margin top of 5, and then another class called container. All these are Bootstrap 5 classes, and we're going to give it a dflex class and then a flex column, and we want it to be in the center. So I'm going to give it a Bootstrap class called align dash items dash center, as well as justify dash content dash center. So I'm going to press enter, and that particular div gets created for us. And then we now need two columns, the column for our input field as well as the column for our submit button. The first input field is going to be a type of text because it's going to be where we type in the name of the avatar we want to submit. So quickly, let me just create a new div once more, and I'm going to give it a class of column of 4. So let's, okay, I didn't spell the call very well. It's supposed to be COL, not CLO. And within this div, I can just have an input tag, and it's a type of text. I need to give it a class as well. So I'm going to give it a class of form control, and the placeholder, we can just say avatar name. And I think that's all we need to do. So I need to probably, let me duplicate this, and let's probably put a BR tag in between them. So I'm just going to say BR, and then I'm going to give it a margin bottom of 3. So I'm going to change this type from text to file because we are trying to upload a file, so it has a file attribute. We need to create a button next to submit our form, so it's going to have a class of btn dash success, which is also a Bootstrap class. And I'm going to press enter, and I'm going to say submit avatar, and I'm gonna save. So for us to see this field, what we need to do is to head back to our page, and we're gonna click on the add avatar button. But for now, it's not that navigating anywhere, so I need to head to the navbar components, and I'm gonna give it a router link, the button that has the add avatar. I'm gonna say router link. I'm gonna set it to the name of the route to add the avatar. If I check the app routing file, I believe to add an avatar, we named it add dash avatar. So I'm going to copy this and then close our app routing module and paste it in. So I'm going to save everything we've done so far and head back to the browser so we can see how our add avatar components looks like. As you can see, this is the UI for our add avatar. I think it looks nice. Let me check the console. Hopefully we don't have any form of errors. Cool. We can now create the endpoint to add the avatar. So I head back to the add avatar components, but this time it's going to be the TS file. And here we have to start off by configuring our constructor. We need to bring in some form of helpers like the form builder, the avatar service, as well as the router, because when we submit, we want to route back to the landing page. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in everything we need. So I'm going to say private form builder. So I need to import the form builder. IntelliSense is not giving me the chance to do that, so I have to do it manually. But first, let me bring in the rest as well. So I'm gonna say private router of type router. Okay, and then the next one is the service. So I can just say private service, and we want to bring in the avatar service. And in fact, I don't think we need to bring in the service here. We'll be consuming the API directly in this component because we'll be making use of form data, and I think it's much more simpler for us to do it right here. So I don't need to bring in the service, rather I will bring in the HTTP client. So I'm gonna say private HTTP, and then I'm gonna bring in the HTTP client. We need to import this as well. is coming from Angular slash common slash HTTP. So what we've not brought in here is the form builder. So I'm just going to import that manually by typing in import, and then inside the bracket I can just say form builder, and it's coming from at Angular slash forms. So that's pretty much straightforward. As you can see, all errors are gone and we've been able to configure everything we need in our constructor. So the next thing I want to do is for us to be able to get the data in our form. That is, anytime we want to submit the file as well as the name field, input field. Let me open the browser once more. Anytime we want to submit these two input fields, I want us to be able to get the values to do that. So we'll need to make use of the reactive form to implement this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an instance of the form group by creating a new variable at above here. So I'm going to say avatar form, and I'm going to give it a type of form group, which we also need to import as well. So let's see if we get intelligence for that. We're not. So I need to paste it within the form builder brackets. So, and we have this error, which I think anytime I create tutorials it usually comes up. It says it has no initializer, so we need to give it an exclamation mark to get rid of that warning. So next step is within the constructor brackets, what I can do is I can call the avatar form reference I created above by saying this dot avatar form, and then I can say is equals to this dot form builder dot group, and it's gonna be in form of an object that is going to have a key as well as a value. So the first is going to be the name, which contains the input field of type text, and for the initial value is going to be empty, and then it's a required field, so I'm going to pass in validators.required. If you remember, in our schema we made it a required field as well, so we need to repeat the same thing on the front end. Validators is something we also need to import. Let me see if okay, we need to just paste it within our at Angular slash forms module. So I'm just going to paste it here to get rid of the error. Then we do the same for the file as well. The file is going to be called avatar, and we repeat the same thing we did for the name. The initial value is empty, and then we pass in the validators as required. Now this avatar name we have here, remember in our API, when we created the add API, we named our upload.single, we named it avatar, as you can see right here, avatar. So it has to be consistent or else you get an error. So the name has to be the same, just like we configured this in the API using Multer as our middleware. So heading back to the Angular project, so what I'm going to do next is within the app component file, I need to pass in the form control name. So for the input field, I'm going to type in form control name, and it's going to be called name, just like we have it in our TS file, and the same thing applies to the avatar. But for the avatar, because it's a file, we will not be able to use the form control name. Instead, we'll be making use of the onChange event handler, the change event handler rather, the change, not onChange. So pardon me for that. So I'm going to type in change is equals to, and I'm going to call it upload avatar, and it's going to have an event argument which allows us to get the value, and it's a function we need to create within our TS file. So I'm just going to grab this upload avatar, and out below our constructor I'm going to create the function. So I can just say upload avatar, and then we open a bracket and we pass in the event argument and give it a type of any. And within this upload avatar, we need to get the value of the file. It comes in form of an array, but what we need is the first value of the file. So we need to create a value to get that, and to get that we need to make use of the event.target.files to extract that, and we just need the first value because we are uploading just a single file. If we are dealing with multiple files, we don't need to get the first file, so we need to make use of the bracket notation and set it to 0. What do I mean by this? So I can just create a variable called file. So I'm going to say const file is equals to event.targets.files. If we're dealing with text, I guess it's going to be event.target.value, but because it's files, we do event.target.files, and then we pass in the bracket notation to get the first value of the array. So with this we should be able to get the file, and we can now make use of the form group reference we implemented in the constructor using this dot avatar form, as you can see. So we can use it here by saying this dot avatar form dot patch value, and then we open the brackets, and within the brackets we need to pass in the value of the file by saying avatar, and then we give it a type of the variable we created above, which is file, and we're good to go with that. So one thing I also noticed is I don't think we need this avatar we have right here, since we have already configured it in the upload avatar. So I'm just going to comment it out, and with that we can proceed to the next stage. We are able to get the values of each of these files from our HTML. So now we need to configure the submit. So anytime we click on submit, we send the data to the database. But for now, I just want to console log the values in the console. Anytime we click on submit avatar, you see the form is refreshing right now because we've not configured that. So to do that, I need to head back to the HTML file, and within the form tag, I need to pass in two attributes, or better still, you could call them form handlers. So I'm going to make use of the form group. So I'm going to say form group, and then I'm going to call it avatar form, just like we did in our TS file. The form name has to be consistent. So as you can see, we called it avatar form here, so it has to be the same. And then secondly, we need to pass in the event. We need to configure the ng submit event handler. So I'm going to say ng submit. This allows us to pass in the function we want to use to submit the form. So I'm going to say on submit, and then I'm going to copy this on submit function and create it in our TS file below the ng underneath. I'm just going to say on submit, and yeah, with that, I think we're good to go. So now I can log the data we have in the console. And to do that, I can type in console.log this dot avatar form dot get. We want to get the name first, so I'm going to pass in the name key, and then I'm going to say dot value, and then right below it, let's create another console.log. This time around it's going to be this.avatar form.get.avatar, and then I'm going to save everything we've done so far, and let's see if we're able to log this data in the console. So for the name field, I'm going to type in test1, and then I'm going to choose a file that is an avatar. I'm going to choose this particular avatar, and then I'm going to click on open, and let's click on submit avatar and see if their values are thrown into the console. And for the name, we're able to get the name, but for the file we get undefined. I think this could be down to the fact that we commented out this particular value in the form group. Let me uncomment it and then click on save, and let's try again. So once again, I say test1, and then choose file, select that image, click on submit. Yeah, actually I thought we didn't need this particular key anymore, but I realized that we do need it. So as you can see, we now have an object that has the details of our file. It has the file name, it has the last modified. This I think is a date format, and then it has the size as well as the image type, which is PNG. From the backend, we configured the API to accept just PNG and JPG and JPEG format. So I think this is in line with it. Anything apart from that, and we'll get an error message. So with this, we can now submit our values into the database. So to do that, I need to make use of form data. So what is form data? Form data allows us to construct a set of key value pairs from the values inside of a form field. So what do I mean by this? It allows us to send our data to the backend in the specific order we want, because when you look at this API tester, you can see that we have a pair of key and value. We have a key of avatar, and then the file, which is the value, the same with the name, which is the key, and then the text, which is the value. So that's what form data does for us. And for this tutorial, we're making use of a specific method in form data called .append. So quickly, let's try this out. So I'm going to create a variable by saying let's form data is equals to new form data. We created the reference of the form data. Then we can now say form data dot append. So if you are, in case you are wondering what the form data does, append does. So the append is like a method in form data that allows us to add new values into an existing key. Like it helps us to add new key value pairs if they do not already exist. So in case if they are empty, the append helps us to add it to our database. So The first one I'm going to configure is the name. So the key for the first one is the name, just like the database have expect. And then we pass in the value for the name, which is this dot avatar dot get, and then which has an argument of name. So we are able to get the value. We need to pass the value, and then I'm going to duplicate this, and this is going to be called avatar. So I'm going to paste in avatar, and it's going to be this dot avatar dot get, then the argument is avatar, and then be passing the value as well. So now we're able to append the updated values to our database by making use of the HTTP client. So what I'm going to do next, I'm going to say this dot http dot post, because it's a post request, and then I'm going to have a parenthesis open, and we're going to make use of backticks, and we need to make use of the dollar sign and reference the environmental variable which contains our base URL. So I'm going to say environment, which we need to import here as well, dot base URL. I'm gonna say /add, because if you remember in our REST API we created in the Node.js, you can see it's /add. So we are trying to push to this particular endpoint. So I'm gonna say /add, and then I'm going to pass in the form data values. So I'm going to say form data, and then it returns an observable, and we need to subscribe to it. So I'm going to say dot subscribe, and then we need to make use of the observers, that is next and error. So for the next, which contains the successful response, so I'm going to say res, and then make use of the fat arrow, open the brackets, and whatever we want to do in terms of anytime we get a successful response, we can do it here. What I want to do is to route back to the home page and display the newly added avatar. So I'm going to make use of the Angular router while also logging the response to the console just to see how it looks like. So I'm just going to say this dot router dot navigate. I'm going to have it within here, and the home page is where we have the list of all the avatars. So I'm just going to make use of / that handles that, and we need to pass in the next observer, which is called error. So I'm going to do this right here. I'm going to say error. Okay, I think we have an error, actual error in the code. Probably I opened it in the wrong bracket. Okay, I see where the error is. We have an extra bracket right here, so I'm going to remove it. So now we now have the error observer. So I can just say error and then open the bracket for the error, passing the error, and make use of the fat arrow. And we can alert an error to the browser by saying error occurred while trying to upload the avatar. So I can just say error occurred while uploading avatar. So I'm gonna save, and let's test this out. Let's see if we're able to add a new avatar. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add a wrong avatar. Let me type in testing 10 and then choose a file. So this time around, you see I have a text file here, which is not an image. Let's see if we get an error while try to upload the text file. So let me click on submit, and we get an error that says error occurred while trying to upload avatar, and it returns an internal server error because of what we're trying to do. So I'm going to click on OK, and let's try to upload an actual legitimate file. So let me select this particular file right here, or avatar as the case may be, and let's try to submit it this time around and see if we get a successful response. And as you can see, we did get a successful response, and then the list is updated with the newly added avatar. So our add avatar works, and as you can see, the response shows all the data in an object, the API key, the asset ID, created art, and the likes. So I'm just going to close this particular page, and the next step we need to implement is how to create the modal for the avatars. The modal is now where we will be able to delete as well as update the avatar. So what happens in actual fact is anytime we click on these images, the modal pops up. So without wasting much time, let's start with that. So I need to grab this modal from Bootstrap 5. So once again, we head straight to Bootstrap 5, and I will search for modals and then click on that. So we get presented with different types of modal. So the specific modal I'm going to copy is probably Let's check this one out. So I think I'll go with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy everything inside of this code, and then I'm going to head straight to my list avatar component. That's where we'll be displaying the avatar. So let me close the add avatar component and we head back to the list avatar component, and down below outside of the container class I'm going to paste in modal, and so I'm going to save what we currently have and see how the page looks like. So we have this button from Bootstrap showing up, but we don't want this button to trigger the modal. What we want to trigger the modal is the image. So what I'm going to do is, as you can see from the button we copied above, this is the button that triggers the modal, as you can see from the comments directly from Bootstrap. So we need to copy the attributes here and then put this in the image, which I've already done. So the attributes that trigger the image is the databs target as well as the databs modal attribute. Those are the two attributes we need. As you can see, they are right here, and the databs toggle attribute is called modal, and then the databs target is called static backdrop. This name has to be the same name that wraps around our modal div, or else it won't pop up. Because we already have these particular attributes in our img tag, so I can just get rid of this button. So what that means is when I click on the image, that is the avatar, the modal gets popped up. So I'm going to save and let's see if that happens. So as you can see, when I click on each of the images, the modal pops up. So we don't just want the modal to pop up, we want the avatar to pop up inside of the modal. So to do that, we need to create a function that gets the data for each image. But first, probably I can just put a static image within a modal body. So I can just go back to the code and right inside of the modal body, I can just copy one of the img tags we have in our notepad, and then I'm gonna copy that and then paste it within the modal body. I'm gonna get rid of the attributes from Bootstrap. So I think with this we should have one of the images, a static image showing up in the modal. So let's see how that looks. So as you can see, we now have our modal showing a static image, but we need to make it dynamic. Before I proceed, I need to change the buttons. So this button is supposed to be, there's supposed to be an edit, that is update, and a delete button. So I think this close we can make edit, and instead of btn secondary, we can give it a btn primary, and then for the understood I can give it a button of, I can call it delete, and then give it btn danger, and then I save. Instead of delete, I have what seems to be an angry emoji, so let me change that and then save. And as you can see, the buttons have been updated. So we have an edit button and delete button. But first, let's make this image dynamic. That is, anytime we click on a specific image, that's the image that shows in the avatar, in the modal. So heading back to the code, we need to create a function to do that. So this function is going to be within the img tag. So I'm going to call the function, it's going to be a click event. So I'm going to call it modal data. So I'm going to say modal data, and then I'm going to pass in the value of our avatar, which we have right here. So once I pass it in, I can now create this modal data in our list component cs file below our display avatar function. So let's say we have this, and as you can see, there's an argument, so we need to configure the argument as well. So I'm going to give it a type, an argument of avatar, and it's going to be a type of any, and we need to reference, that is, we need to assign a data to this avatar argument. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to console log this avatar argument. So I'm just going to pass in the avatar, and then I'm going to save, and let's see if anytime we click on the modal we get the data inside of the console. So let's click on one of these avatars. As you can see, we get the data. As you can see, we have the avatar, the Cloudinary ID, the created as, the name. So now that we have the data, we can now display the particular key that has the data for the image. That is, the image coming from Cloudinary is the avatar key. So all I need to do is to head back to the code and then assign it to a global variable. So I can just scroll above and then create a global variable. I can call this avatar data, and give it an initializer. and it's going to be a type of get avatar. Remember, we created a model that expects the data to be returned the way we expect it to. So we already import it, so we're fine. So I'm gonna copy the avatar data, and I'm going to say this dot avatar data is equals to avatar, and then I can just head back to the HTML file, and then I can say, instead of having this static string we have right here, I can just make it dynamic and type in avatar data dot avatar, because that's the name of the key that contains our image. So I'm going to save, and I believe the image from the data should be dynamic this time around. So, and it seems we have some sort of error. It says cannot reach properties of undefined. Probably we need optional chaining, so I'm gonna put a question mark there, and then I'm gonna save. But we've got a warning here that says the left side of this optional chain operation does not include null or undefined. So I think we might still need to make further adjustments, because I think this warning still persists. Let me see. I think modal still works well. I could say we should ignore this warning and just proceed with what we've done, but probably I think this is down to the type. If I change the type of this avatar data probably to any, I believe that error should disappear, which it just did. So probably we should just stick with type of any and not have to deal with that warning. So with the way the modal works now, it's now dynamic, but one thing I want to do is to make the modal have its own components instead of implementing it inside of the list components, just like we have right here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate a new component for this modal. So within the Angular CLI, I'm going to generate a new component by making use of the ng generate command. So I'm going to say ng generate components. So inside of the components folder, so it's just going to be forward slash modal. So the modal has its own component. So now that this is generated, I'm going to head straight to VS Code, and I'm going to grab from the modal dialog class. I'm going to grab everything there. So let's cut it out and then paste it inside of the modal component. So it's going to be inside of the HTML. Now we need to make use of the input decorator to pass from the parent component, to pass data from the parent component to the child component, which is now the modal component. So we need to grab the selector. So the selector is app dash modal. So I'm going to grab the selector, and then I'm going to paste it within the list avatar HTML file. So we can just do this, and right now we still have an error because the modal component does not recognize this avatar data we're trying to pass to it. But for it to work, we need to make use of the input decorator. The input decorator in Angular helps us to communicate, like I said earlier, from the parent component to the child component, so we can pass data from there. So to do that, the first thing we need to do is we need to import the input decorator in our modal.ts file. So I'm just gonna create a new variable here called at input, and then it's gonna have a bracket, and the name of the input is going to be called avatar, and we need to give it an initializer with a type of any. Then we need to import the input decorator. Yeah, I think we've done that above. Next up, we need to head to the list avatar component, and we need to pass the property of the input right here, which we called avatar. So I'm going to say avatar, which is what we called the input decorator, and then we pass in the avatar data, which holds the data of the image. So I'm going to copy that, and then I'm going to head to the components file and paste it in, and I believe that's all we need to do here. So I'm going to save our list avatar component. So in the modal components.html file, this is no longer going to be avatar data. This is going to be avatar.avatar. So I'm going to save everything we've done so far, and let's see if we're still able to display the avatar by clicking on the image. But first, we need to restart our server by typing in ng-serve so the project gets compiled. Now that our project has compiled, I'm going to head straight to the page and refresh it so everything we've done so far gets implemented properly. So I'm going to click on one of the avatars. Let's click on the first one. As you can see, now we now have a separate modal that helps us to display the avatar, and with the help of the input decorator, we are able to pass data down from the parent component to the modal component, which serves as our child component. So the next thing we need to do is to implement the delete functionality, that is ability to delete a particular data from the database. So we need to create a service to do this. So quickly, I'll head straight to our avatar service, and we're going to create a new service. So we're going to call this service delete avatar, and then it's going to have a parameter of id of number, and then within the brackets we're going to just make use of the http client to implement the delete. So what we need to do is just return this http delete. So IntelliSense is making some suggestions, so let me go with it so we can proceed to make any form of adjustments. It's providing us with a type of delete avatar. We don't need any type to do that, so I'm going to clear that off. So this http delete environment base url, and the endpoint for this is /delete. So I can just say $, and then I pass in the id. So with this, we're able to configure our delete avatar service. So what we need to do is within the modal component, that's where we integrate the delete avatar functionality. So in the TS file, below the ng on init, we can create the function that helps us to delete the avatar. So I can just say delete avatar, and then I can just, before we proceed, we need to import the service inside of this component. So I'm going to say private service, and I'm going to say avatar service. We need to import it as well, and we need the router. So I'm going to say private. For now, I think it's still fine if we import it, so I'll say private router, and then we import the router. In the delete avatar, I can just say this.service delete avatar, and it requires the id we want to delete. So to get the id, I can just say this avatar underscore id, because the avatar decorator here kinds of holds the data for each avatar that is being selected in the modal. So we are able to extract the id from it by doing underscore id. It returns an observable we can just subscribe to, and then we can return the observer. And like we usually do, we have the next and the error observer. So I can just say next, and then say response, and make use of the fat arrow. And within the fat arrow, I can just say if the response is true, that is, if there's a response when we try to delete the avatar, we're just returning a response, not response.success. So I can just say window.location.reload, and if there is an error, I can just pass in the error observer by saying error, and then pass in the error, use the fat arrow, and then we can alert the error. So we can save, and before we save, actually we need to call the delete avatar function in our modal component. So to do that, I'm just going to copy this delete avatar and then add to the modal component, and in the delete button is going to be a click event handler. So I'm going to pass in the click event handler, and then I'll just say delete avatar, and I can save everything we've done so far. And with that, we can try to delete one of the avatars, and let's see if it works. So let's select this particular avatar, and then we click on delete. As you can see, the avatar gets deleted, and I believe it's going to be deleted on the backend on the database as well. So now we can perform almost all the CRUD operations. We can list, that is get the avatar, we can delete avatar, we can read the avatar. I think the final one we need to do now is to update the avatar. To update the avatar, we need to make use of the route parameters in Angular, because when you check the routing of the project, you can see the update avatar, that is the edit avatar, has a colon of id. So we need to be able to pass the id to our route, anytime we click on the edit avatar, just like we have here. When we click on edit, we navigate to the edit component and also have the route parameters in the URL as well. So to do that, we're gonna make use of this also in the modal component. So I can just create a function that says edit avatar, and then open a bracket right there, and we can just say this dot router, which we created previously, dot navigate, and then within the this dot router dot navigate array, I'm just going to say forward slash edit dash avatar, and then forward slash, I make use of the dollar sign to pass in the ID. So the ID is just going to be just what we did here, which is called this dot avatar dot underscore ID. So I'm going to pass it to our parameter, route parameter, so just like we have here. And then I'm going to call this function in our HTML file in the edit component. Is just going to be a click event as well. So I type in click and then paste in the name of our function, then I save everything we've done, and then we click on the edit button in the modal to see if this works. So let's click on one of the modals. So let me click on this one, and then let's click on edit. So as you can see, we get navigated to the edit avatar page, and if you take a look at the routes, you can see it has a forward slash the ID of that particular avatar. So we can now work on the update avatar right here. To do that, I'm going to grab some things within the add avatar component, and then I'm going to paste it in the edit avatar component because the implementations are similar. So in the add avatars component, we imported some things in the constructor, so we're gonna need everything we import there. So I'm gonna paste it in the edit avatar component as well. So in the constructor, I'm gonna paste that. So I need to import them. So I'm going to import the form builder, which doesn't come through IntelliSense. So let me just grab it from here and then paste it above. And then we're going to need the router. So let's import the router as well as the HTTP client. Another thing we need to import here is the avatar service. So I'm just going to say private service avatar service. So let's import that as well. And then the final thing we need to import is the activate route. This allows us to work with the route parameters. So let's import the activate route. So I'm going to say private activate route, and then let's import it as well, and it's coming from the Angular router. So I think that's all we need to import. So the first thing I want us to do is we need to subscribe to the route parameters by making use of the activated route so that we can get the ID of the particular avatar we want to update. What do I mean by this? Without the ID of the avatar we want to update, we would not be able to update the avatar. So we need to subscribe to this URL and grab this ID. So the route activated route helps us to do that. So we'll be doing this within the ng on init lifecycle hook. So I'm going to say this dot activated route, and then I'm going to say dot params dot subscribe because we need to subscribe to it, and then we make use of the fat arrow and then pass a parameter called params, and then make use of the fat arrow, and then I need to create a variable above. So I'm going to call this variable ID because it's the ID we are trying to extract. I'm going to give it an initializer as well as a type of number. Without the initializer, we have the error that freaks out rather. So I can just say this dot id is equals to params, then we make use of the bracket notation to extract the ID. Now if I console log the ID, let's see what we have in the browser. This dot id, and then I save. Let's check the console. As you can see, we now have the ID right here. Let me increase the font of the console. As you can see, the ID is right here in edit avatar components 25. So we're able to get the ID. Now the next implementation is to get all the data as regarding this ID. That is, we're trying to get the avatar by ID. We have an endpoint for that. So that means we need to create the service for that in our Angular component. What I need to do next is to head straight to the avatar service. So I'm going to say get avatar by ID, and then it's going to have an argument of ID of number, and then within this I can just return this http.get. It's a get request, and then be passing the base URL, which is going to be forward slash the ID of the avatar we're trying to get. So this one is pretty much straightforward. So we can now implement this in our edit avatar component. So I can just say this dot service dot get avatar by id, and then within the get avatar of id, it expects an argument which is the id, and we already created that using the activated route. So I'm just going to pass it as an argument, and then we need to subscribe to it just like we've done on so many occasions, and then we return a response. So response, and make use of the fat arrow, and within the brackets we can console log our response. So I can just say console.log response. So I believe we'll get all the data concerning this particular modal we clicked on that has this specific id. As you can see, we get all the data, the avatar, that is the image, the Cloudinary id, the created art, as well as the name. So that means we can pre-fill the form in the field before implementing the edits. So we need to pass this response to a global variable as well, because we will use it in another function. So I can just call it data and also give it a type of any. So we scroll down here and I can just say this dot data is equals to res, which is the response. Now we can now deal with the UI and the form, because right now the UI doesn't show. So the edit avatar and the add avatar are the same UI. So I'm just going to grab everything within the add avatar. So it's a form. So I'm just going to grab it. I'm going to close this, and in the edit avatar HTML file, I'm going to paste it in while making simple edits. For instance, we haven't named our form, so it's going to be edit form instead of avatar form. So I'm just going to say edit form, and we need to give it the form group. So I can just say edit form. In fact, let's call it edit avatar form. Edit avatar form, and then give it the initializer and give it the pass the form group to it, and we need to update it in our component file. And the onSubmit as well, we need to create that function. That should be probably the final function we want to create, so it should be below the ng on init. So I'm just going to pass the onSubmit right there. For now it's going to be empty. And then another thing we need to do is the form control name as well as the upload avatar. We need to create that function as well. So for the upload avatar, for now I'm going to leave it as empty, but it's similar to what we have in the add avatar, the implementation. So in fact, what I need to do is just to grab the implementation we have for the form in the constructor for the add avatar. So in the add avatar ts file, let's grab this form group object. So and then paste it right here. So this is going to be this dot edit avatar form instead. And then in the upload avatar function, we also need to copy everything we have there. So update upload avatar function, let me grab everything we have there, head straight to the edit avatar components, and then so this is going to be edit avatar form. And we have this error because we don't pass the argument of events, which is going to be of type any. And I think we've done majority of what we need to do. We've been able to implement the integration of the form as well as the get avatar by id API. We'll be able to extract that, and then as well as the upload avatar. So let's save and see how the UI looks. So as you can see, the UI looks just like the way we want it to be. That is when similar to when we want to add an avatar, but we want to prefill this form. So quickly to do that, I need to make use of the get method in reactive forms. So this is going to be within the ng on init. So what I can do is after this dot data, I can just say this dot edit avatar form dot get, and then I want to get the value of the name, and then I can just say dot set value. The set value helps us to do this, and then we can pass in the this.data.name, which has the name of the prefilled data in the database. So when we check the UI, I think it should be there. You can see we have testing3. When you extract this object, you see in the console the name of the form is testing3, so it's prefilled now, so we can always update it when we want. So that means the last thing we need to do is to integrate the functionality in the onSubmit form. Like we've done previously, the functionality in the add avatar and the edit avatar is similar. So I'm just going to grab everything within the onSubmit form. So let's just copy everything and then make some adjustments. So I'm going to copy it and then scroll to the onSubmit. So I'm going to paste it in, and then we can start making edits. The first edit is to change the name of this form to edit avatar form. So what we need to do is to import the environment file. So I'm just gonna use IntelliSense to deal with that. And then once that is imported, we need to change the API from /add to /update. And the updates, as we all know, requires an ID. So I'm just gonna do the $sign and then pass in the ID by making use of this .id, which is the global variable we created above that now holds the ID of each of the avatar we are trying to update. And with that, I think we are good to go. As you can see in the next observer, we are rerouting ourselves back to the landing page, and then if there's an error, we are trying to alert the user for the error. And I think we're pretty much done with this. So let me save and then let's test this out to see if we're able to update the avatar. So instead of testing 3, I can just say testing updated 3 to be sure the update works. Testing updated 3. Let's choose a new file entirely we haven't used before. I think this avatar hasn't been used, and I can just click on submit avatar, and immediately you get an error that says error occurred while uploading avatar, and it says 404 not found. I think our API wasn't recognized. Yes, I understand why that is. The HTTP method is not post, it's put, because we are trying to update. Because when you check our REST API to update an avatar, we made use of puts. As you can see, /update. As you can see, router.put. So we made an error there. So now that it's been fixed, let me save and then let's head back to the browser and see if it works this time around. So I'm gonna say testing updated 3, then choose a file. I will still stick with this particular avatar and then click on submit. As you can see, the avatar gets updated this time around because we tried to update the first avatar we have right here. Let's update this particular avatar. Click on edit, and then the name says testing 10. Let me change the name to testing update 10 and then click on choose file. So I'll choose an avatar similar to that one, but this one has a black and white. I don't know what that is. A code headwear. So I'm gonna click on submit avatar, and as you can see, that avatar has been updated. So our CRUD functionality works. We're able to create avatar, read an avatar, update an avatar, as well as delete an avatar. To round up, let me just create everything we've done once again. Let's add a new avatar. So I can just call it testing 11 and then choose a file, select this particular avatar, click on submit avatar. The avatar gets created and shown in the landing page. Then we can update this avatar we just created by clicking on edit, and then instead of testing 11, call it testing 12. Then change it to a new avatar, probably this avatar, and then click on submit avatar, and it gets updated in the UI. And probably we don't like it anymore, we can just proceed to delete it, and it gets deleted from the UI. So the full CRUD functionality works perfectly well. If you have any questions, make sure to drop it in the comment section, and you should also remember the code base is going to be in the description box below as well, so you can have access to it and add more functionalities to this project. So before we go, probably we should also check our Cloudinary database and see if we have only one image there. Yeah, we have only one image there. So everything we are doing in the front end is also reflecting in the Cloudinary dashboard, as well as, okay, let me refresh our MongoDB Atlas database. So we have only one record in our MongoDB database. So everything works perfectly well. And with that, I'm going to call it a day, and I'll see you again in the next one.